I'm Kelty McGuire, and you're listening to the Kids Are Childfree podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Kids Are Childfree podcast. I feel almost nervous today for some reason. Maybe it's not nerves. It's probably excitement. And it's excitement because today marks our 100th episode of the Kids Are Childfree podcast, which I don't know about you folks, but this feels like a really big milestone to me. We launched the Kids Are Childfree podcast in January of 2024, so a little over 2 years ago. And I'll share a little story right now. Let's have story time, shall we? I had this idea for this podcast, and I thought, we need to hear about how people are making and have made this Kids Are Childfree decision, because seemingly this is just a magical event, right? Like so many people, as we all hear and know, say things like, I just knew I wanted to have kids, or I woke up on my 35th birthday and I suddenly realized, or conversely, we hear things like, I never wanted to have a child, or I told my mom when I was 5 years old that I would never be having a baby. And of course, we've heard stories like this on the podcast as well. But for the most part, this podcast was started because I thought, how is everyone else actually getting to and making this decision? It can't be that simple because this is such a big life-changing choice. And how are people who were ambivalent or offensive like I was making this decision? And how are they actually thinking through and sort of feeling about the different aspects of this choice? And so this idea, this seed of inspiration for the Kids Are Childfree podcast was born. I knew that I wanted to speak in equal terms to parents as well as those without children. And I also wanted to explore some of the different sort of like issues or themes, what have you, that intersect with this choice. What about if you had a difficult upbringing as a child yourself? What about if your partner doesn't want to have kids? What if you adopt a child? How does this play out in like real life and real terms? So the idea of also having different sort of expert voices and people who have lived out these different kind of experiences, that was something that I wanted to incorporate in the podcast as well. And despite this idea, but despite the fact that I knew this was a podcast the world needed, because in going out onto the internet, looking through Spotify and Apple Podcasts, there were essentially no podcasts on this topic. There had been one or two in the past, but they were, I guess, now defunct, no longer recording. And so I thought, how can it be in this big, wide world that there is no dedicated podcast where each and every episode is addressing this topic? How can this be? And yet, I dragged my heels in getting this thing made. I felt nervous for a few reasons, not so much at the prospect of starting a podcast, because something you may not know is that I did have a solo podcast episode before when I was doing professional and business coaching called the Clarity Podcast. You may or may not still be able to dig that up online. But I'd never had a guest podcast before. I'd never interviewed people. And so I was quite nervous about the prospect, reaching out to various names, sometimes fairly notable people who've written books and who have been on TV. And I've since learned that there's no need for intimidation, right? We're all just people who are grappling with this decision, its various aspects, like anyone else. But I was feeling kind of intimidated about reaching out to guests. I was feeling intimidated about talking about such a personal and nuanced topic. And of course, the perfectionist in me thought, what if it's not good? And how am I going to make sure it's just right? And how am I going to bring all these different components together? So there was a lot of procrastination that happened in the days and weeks leading up to the Kids Are Childfree podcast launch, to the point that in the weeks, months preceding, I said to my husband on more than one occasion, I just feel like I can't get this thing done and I can't bring it to life. And I remember at one point, Chris said to me, well, maybe just don't do the podcast, right? You do have to wonder sometimes if you're really procrastinating, maybe you just don't want to do the thing. Maybe you feel like you should, or that it's perhaps a good idea, or you feel pressure. Maybe you've promised something to the greater world. He said, maybe just don't do the podcast. And I remember having this really sort of forceful feeling come up inside me. And I said to him, no, I feel like I have to do this. Like I can see that this is going to be a thing. I see how needed this is. In fact, I really want to create this podcast. There's just some sort of inner resistance. Well, as the story goes, as you can appreciate and know, of course, listening to episode 100, I did push past that resistance. And I just want to say for any of you who have some sort of dream or project or, maybe business venture on your minds, and you're facing resistance around it, if you really believe in this, if you know this is something that ultimately is going to be your path, but you're like trying to face that, I guess, inner resistance or hurdles, keep going. I kept going. I'm sure glad that I did. And according to a whole bunch of you, you're glad I kept going too. What I decided to do for today's 100th episode, because I wanted to do something different, something special to mark the occasion, is I decided to turn the microphone over to you to ask you to share a bit about your decision journey. Some of the women that you're going to hear from today, and sadly, we just got messages from women. Maybe we've got some men out there who would like to get in touch and leave a voice note for a future episode. But they shared about their journey, about where they're at today. Some of them have made a choice. Some of them are still in the throes of indecision, on the fence. Although, as you'll hear, most of them are leaning one way or another. And yeah, I said share a little bit about what's been helpful. If the podcast has been part of that journey, let us know what the podcast has meant to you. And I gotta say, I am just so thrilled with the messages I received from all of you. I am immensely touched. I don't know what I expected, but you all are total podcasting pros, very articulate. You are able to really share and express the story of your journeys thus far. And so today I'm turning the microphone over to all of these wonderful women who reached out to me. Those of you listening who've left a message, thank you so much. I'm so grateful that you said yes to sharing a bit about your story with us today. So why don't we get into things and turn the mic over to today's first mini guest, we'll say. You're all mega, by the way. This is a compliment in German. Side note, when something's really amazing, mega. Let's turn it over to one of our guests. We've got some brief messages from a bunch of you. So here's our very first.
I spent most of my life assuming I would be a mom. I'm 34 now and realizing that I might choose a completely different life, and that's a really hard thing for me to admit. My name is Monica, and I'm from McHenry, Illinois. I started listening to this podcast a couple years ago because I didn't know if I wanted to have kids, and I felt like I was running out of time to figure it out. The confusing part is that growing up, I always thought I would be a mom. I remember counting down the years until I turned 25 because that was the age my mom was when she had her first child, so in my head that was always the plan for my life. I got engaged at 24 to my high school sweetheart, who is now my husband, and we always talked about having a family one day. We had baby names picked out, we talked about turning our spare room into a nursery, and I really thought that chapter of our life was right around the corner. But when we got married and real life set in, we quickly realized we weren't ready. We liked our life together. We liked sleeping in on weekends, quiet mornings, traveling, focusing on ourselves, and honestly just enjoying our time together. But also financially, we just weren't in a place where we felt ready. I remember feeling that I was failing somehow because I wasn't following the timeline I had planned for myself. I told myself that once I had a better job and was making more money, I would feel more ready. Then, at one point, I actually did get pregnant, but it ended very early in what my doctor called a chemical pregnancy, which is a miscarriage within the first 5 weeks of gestation. It was so early enough that thankfully no medical procedure was needed. Truthfully, I didn't even consider it a pregnancy because I never got to the point where I even felt any different. But what confused me the most was that I didn't feel the sadness that I thought I was supposed to feel. If anything, I felt relief, and then I felt a lot of guilt for feeling that way. I didn't tell many people about it because honestly I was embarrassed, but that experience really made me start to question what I really wanted. As years went on, I did become more financially stable, but instead of wanting kids more, that baby fever I once had most of my life slowly went away. And that scared me because I always thought I would just wake up one day and know for sure that I wanted to be a mom. Now, most of my friends are parents. I've watched them celebrate with gender reveals and baby showers, and I've seen all the happiness that they have with their kids, and sometimes I feel sad that I don't have that. But I've also watched them go through some really hard things, mentally, physically, and financially. I've seen them at their lowest, and honestly, I don't think I could go through those things. I respect them so much. They are incredible parents, and honestly, they're superheroes to me. I love them and their kids so much, but I started to realize that just because they are meant to be parents doesn't necessarily mean that I am. One of the hardest parts about making this decision for me is the guilt. I feel guilty that I might not give my parents and in-laws the grandchildren that they want, and I know they would be amazing grandparents. I feel guilty that my siblings and in-laws might not get to be the cool aunts and uncles that I know they would be. And even though I know that this is my life and my decision, I still sometimes feel like I'm robbing everyone of something by not having kids. And that feeling is really heavy sometimes. But there are days where I look at my life and I'm just really happy with what I have. I love my husband. I love our life together. I love our quiet mornings, our freedom, our ability to travel, and the life we've built together. I'm proud of myself for not just jumping into something because it's what everyone expected. And honestly, this podcast has helped me more than anything else in getting closer to a final decision. Listening to people's stories, hearing people talk about regret, guilt, freedom, happiness, and all the different ways that life can look has made me realize that there isn't just one path that we're all supposed to follow. It has made me feel less alone, less selfish, and less broken for not knowing what I want. Although I'm leaning heavily towards not having kids right now, I still don't know exactly what my final decision will be, but I do know that whatever decision I make, it will be because it's truly what I want for my life and not just what I thought I was supposed to want. And for now, I'm still on the fence, but thanks to this podcast, I don't feel quite as alone on that fence anymore.
All right. Thank you so much, Monica, for leaving that really articulate, beautiful, thoughtful message. And, you say that you are proud of yourself for not just jumping in because that's what's expected. I am proud of you too. And I am frankly proud of all of you who are listening, who are taking the time to be intentional with this choice. I know for some of you, it doesn't feel like a decision to be intentional, right? You're like, I just don't know. But the fact that you want to make a conscious choice, that you are thinking through the different aspects of this decision, that you want to make sure that this is something that is coming from within you, and it's not just something you feel like you should be doing or shouldn't be doing. This is just such a wonderful thing. So kudos to all of you.
Hi, so my name is Jara. I'm 36 years old and I'm from Spain, so I'm sorry about my English. So I think I've always been on the fence in this decision of having kids or remain child-free, but I felt stronger about it when I turned 35 because I think this is the age where I felt like I needed to have made a decision so far, and it didn't feel clear to me at that point. So I started panicking and spiraling around the idea because I thought that I needed to feel very strong about one of the choices, but I wasn't. The truth is that it's a very complex decision. And I felt like if I didn't have a solid yes, then I shouldn't do it because I felt like other mothers to be were like very, very passionate about the idea. So I was in my head. But then I did this course and also I started reading a lot about the subject. And then I realized that it's not that easy for most of us. It's obviously a very difficult decision, especially if you love your life. I mean, if you have a whole life with people you love, if you're happy, if you love doing the activities, your hobbies, your job, your husband, like you don't really feel that urge to change it, especially if you don't really know if the change is going to be for the best. So yeah, I was a lot in my head. And I remember thinking that I wish I didn't have to make the decision. Like I just hoped that there was some kind of sign from the sky or someone to make the decision for me. And funny enough, it turned out that I needed to go to fertility treatment, IVF, and this is my struggle right now. So when I finally decided to pursue the motherhood, then I found this unexpected challenge for me. And now I deeply regret thinking that I wish that someone could make the decision for me. one of the things that I learned the most about this process so far is that there's really not a perfect option. And that's why it's so hard, because it shouldn't be, you shouldn't have to make a decision that it's perfect. There's always going to be something that you're missing. But even if it's hard, being able to make that decision, to go through the pros and cons and being able to do it freely is a gift. And we should be living it in a more grateful way. I mean, I wish I would have, when I thought that I was free enough to make the decision. Now that I'm not in charge of this decision, I'm so sorry that I was so sad and so stressed about the decision. So if this helps anyone, yeah, just chill, because it's good to be able to make decisions and to be in charge of your own happiness. So wishing all of you lots of love, and yeah, bye.
All right. Thank you so much, Jara. And we wish you all the very best with your IVF journey. I really like what Jara shared when she said, it's like, it makes sense that if you love your life, if things are going really well, that you wouldn't necessarily have an urge to change it. And this is something that I hear from a lot of you, is that life is good. You have maybe a relationship that you really love that you've invested in, or you've got work that's meaningful to you, or you've got these different kinds of hobbies, or maybe all of the above. And so I think she makes a really good point that it can feel like something that's sort of tenuous and fragile that we don't want to mess with, so to speak, when it comes to engaging with this decision and the potential of becoming a mom.
Hi, my name is Kristen. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, and I am 42 years old. After a couple years, we finally made the decision to not have children. We did a lot of soul searching. What we realized really was that we think perhaps we were being influenced a little bit by those that surrounded us with children, and we had kind of a fear of missing out. So we really had to get clear as to what it is that we really wanted. And we also listened to an audio book called The Baby Decision that made us become very clear on what it was that we wanted versus not want. So we finally made the decision to not have children.
All right. Thank you so much, Kristen, for reaching out. And if you want to hear from Merle Bombaderi, who wrote the book, The Baby Decision, which Kristen mentioned in her message, you can check out episode 29. This is one of the fan favorites, if you will, episodes that we've had of the podcast. And The Baby Decision can also be a really great book to explore and work through if you are wanting to go deeper in this decision and figure out which path is right for you. Kristen, congrats on your confidently decidedly child-free decision.
Hi, Kelsey. My name is Kristen, and I'm from Ontario, Canada. I just want to start by saying how much I love the Kids Are Child-Free podcast. I'm so grateful I came across your Instagram page in 2024. The decision of whether to have children or remain child-free has been a complicated and deeply personal one for me. In 2022, about a year after my husband and I got married, I received a pretty devastating infertility diagnosis. Up until then, we had talked about kids, but not really as a conscious decision. It was more something we assumed would be the next step, so we started trying without giving it a lot of deeper thought. If I'm being honest though, I've always felt a lot of fear around having children, fear of how they might change our lives, our relationship, and our freedom, both financially and freedom with our time. But despite those fears, we still moved forward and tried. After my diagnosis, I learned that I can't conceive using my own eggs, which meant our only option would be adoption or egg donation. That added an entirely new layer of complexity to an already difficult decision. For a long time, I think that complexity kept me stuck. But when I really started to look deeper, I realized it wasn't just that. It was also societal pressure, social norms, and this underlying belief that becoming a mom is what gives a woman value. On top of that, there was the fear of missing out and the fear of regret. Now, 4 years later, after my diagnosis, I can finally say that my husband and I are at about an 80% leaning towards remaining child-free. Getting here has taken a lot of work, and I still have moments where I waver or where grief shows up. But I'm in such a different place than I was 4 years ago, or even 2 years ago when I first found your podcast. My husband and I are really learning to embrace what is, rather than focus on what isn't. Your podcast has helped me more than I can put into words. Not only did it connect me to a whole Instagram community I didn't know existed, but it also introduced me to so many helpful resources, workshops, and other podcasts and voices that I truly connect with. Listening to the episodes gave me so much clarity. I found myself really resonating with the child-free guests, looking forward to those episodes in particular. Not that I didn't value hearing from the parents too, but there was something especially meaningful about hearing stories that reflected what my life could look like. It helped me realize that I'm not alone, and hearing other people's experiences, especially from the next generation, was incredibly powerful. A special shout out to Anne's episodes. I've loved so many of your guests: Merle, Carrie, Alice, Nicole Louie, Katie Seppi, and honestly, the list goes on. I'm pretty sure I've listened to every single episode and some of them twice. So many of those conversations helped me dig deeper into this decision and to really reflect on my values, my beliefs, and how I want to move forward. So truly, thank you for creating this space, for sharing these stories, and for helping people like me feel a little less alone while figuring it all out.
All right. And that was Kristen number 2, the other Kristen from Ontario, Canada. Thank you so much, Kristen, for reaching out. And I love all of those different episodes that you mentioned as well. There were so many of them there. Merle's episode. And of course, we had Anne Wenholt, our 91-year-old who's been on the podcast a couple times. I'm going to try and link to the different episodes that are mentioned in today's podcast in case you want to refer to any of those, so you can check the show notes. There's a whole bunch of them, but I'm going to do my best to try and capture those all in case, again, you want to refer to those. And Kristen, it sounds like you have a beautiful life with your husband, and I wish you continued success and a lot of contentment on your journey. All right, this just in, I have shared the dates and open up doors to our Kids Are Child-Free group program spring session. Now, if you are a woman on the fence about kids and you want to be supported on this journey, both as far as being part of a community of women who know what it's like to be on the fence, as well as by myself, yours truly, who will act as your guide in this process of figuring out whether kids or child-free is a path for you, you're going to want to check out this program. We're going to be kicking things off on April 28th, and this program will run for 3 months, where I'm going to take you through a step-by-step process to help you get clear on the path that is right for you, whatever that path may be. These are so many of the same questions and exercises and process that I personally went through, as well as what I use to guide my private coaching clients. And again, you're going to do it in a group, a small group, typically 4, 6, 8 other women, to in community come together, have discussion, go through these exercises, get the support, and really create sort of a dedicated space in your life to tackle this question. Because if you're anything like me, when I was exploring the Kids Are Child-Free decision, and if you're anything like most of my clients, this decision can really bleed over into everything, right? Your whole day, your week, your month, your nights out with your partner, whether it's going to work, any aspect of your life. You just are constantly plagued with this decision. So if you want to contain that a little bit while knowing you're actually taking some steps forward, steps that are going to allow you to come to a clear decision about whether Kids Are Child-Free is for you, again, check out the Kids Are Child-Free group program, which is going to be kicking off the next session on April 28th. I will include a link in the show notes of today's episode. You can also find the details at kidsarechildfree.com under the Work With Me tab.
Hey, Kelty. I just want to start off by saying your podcast has absolutely changed my life. My name is Taylor. I'm 33 years old. I'm turning 34 in a month, and I live in Brooklyn, New York. And, choosing or finding this decision or kind of coming to this decision was basically like I never really questioned parenthood. I got together with my partner, who's now my husband, when we were 19 and 20, and all of our siblings, he has 5 siblings who 3 or 4 of the 5 have 3 kids or more. And I have, siblings with kids. So it was kind of just like the way of things. So I never really questioned it until we got gotten engaged. And then my husband started having some mental health struggles, which were just sort of latent and then coming to the forefront at that time. And so I started to question, how could we have a family in this environment where we're each individually struggling and struggling between us. And so it just started, started our questions about this, and we got through it and got married a few years later. And then, I was turning 32 in 2024 and started to feel the clock was ticking, So I found your podcast and I listened to a couple of the backlog episodes from when you started that year. And then a year later, going through the first year of the podcast, I decided that I did not want children. It was not going to be good for me. And so, I shared with my husband all along this journey, and he was sort of ambivalent for a while. And I mean, I never ended up joining any groups or anything because I was already kind of leaning towards Childfree before I started listening. I just was, still on the fence. And so it took him another year, I think, till kind of like now to get on board with things 100%. And so now we're decidedly child-free. And it's just been, along the road, as I've been questioning it. I have a twin sister who's also child-free. We discussed a lot. I discussed it with friends, and, with my parents are okay with it. I think at first they were a little bit unsure about it, but time has lots of things have happened in the world, right? They understand, my siblings understand, friends understand. And the other person, maybe like my grandmother, who when I was in my mid-20s, I asked for a baby quilt and she made it. I have it, and I've never told her that we're not using it, maybe for our cat. But, I think the other thing with friendships, which I think maybe, you touched on in the one conversation, but maybe would be cool to come back to. And it comes up a lot in different podcasts, right? Or different episodes. But there's actually, I wanted to plug, we just found an app called Dink Social, which I think the creators are are Dutch, but we just met up with a huge group in New York City, and it's just been a wonderful place to meet new people. Because with friends, it's we have very few now who are still without children and are still on the fence, on their own journeys, and so we're worried about quote unquote losing them. I hate to say that, but just changes things, right? So in any case, it's been a really fun opportunity for us to meet new people and people who are decidedly child-free as well. So all of that, I just want to call out some, groups of episodes that you've done that have been incredible. I mean, all of the ones on, elders with Maria Coffey and Ruby Warrington. And when I say elders, I just mean people older than myself, I guess. And Weinhold, and I've read some of their books as well by this point. Helen Taylor, et cetera, et cetera. I'm getting my PhD in clinical research. I'm a dietitian by training, and so I'm really also into the very sciencey things. So all of the episodes that are, especially Jane Van Die's one of the first episodes on as an OBGYN speaking about things. All of the ones from professionals, hospice nurse, and Dr. J, who we now have his book and are working through that since we're decidedly child-free. It's changing some things. But yeah, like I said, all of these ones from scientists you've had on who've done this research, it's incredible. I mean, I've listened to every episode, so all the, motherhood experiences, good, bad, and otherwise. But really the conversation with Astrid about regretting motherhood, there's just so many. I mean, all of them have been incredible and influential to me. So I could go on forever. 5 minutes is clearly not enough, but just thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Taylor, you made me laugh when you talked about the baby quilt from your grandma for your cat. I think this is a wonderful idea. I think your cat absolutely should get the baby quilt if it has not already been gifted to them. Okay, and Taylor, I love that you shouted out Dink Social because I agree they are up to such cool things. Charlie and Allie, I believe they're actually from the States, but yes, they live in the Netherlands. They are fellow immigrants like myself who are living the good life here in Europe. And we'll also link to the app because I know that they have quite a growing community. They are in a number of different cities worldwide. So if you are a Dink couple and you're wanting to make new connections, that could be a fantastic app and offering to check out.
Hi, I'm Emma and I'm 38 years old. I've been living in Denver, Colorado in the USA for about 5.5 years now. And I was born and raised in Hertfordshire, England. From my early 20s through to my mid 30s, I was fairly sure I wanted to be child-free. I'm a career scientist. That to me, I traveled a lot. I've moved to multiple different countries for work. I really enjoyed my independence, and I didn't enjoy restrictions. And so that simply didn't fit with being a mother. And I also knew if I was going to be a mother, I wanted to be a good one. So it was simply not on the cards. And I also just didn't have the sort of biological, emotional yearning either. So that felt like a fairly straightforward period of time. I told people I was in relationships with, this is how I felt. When I got to around 35, I'd just passed my 35th birthday. My sentiments suddenly changed quite rapidly. A number of factors may have contributed to that. I had a health scare. Some other circumstances in my life maybe contributed to me suddenly starting to feel like maybe I want to be a mom, and at least it's something I wanted to think about more deeply, especially given my age at that point, which may have also contributed to how I was feeling. So I gave myself a couple of years to make sure those feelings persisted, partly because also a lot of other things happened in my life. I had a slight career pivot. I got married. I moved apartment. Like, a lot happened in the next couple of years. So I just didn't have the headspace to think about it too much more. And so that took us to 2024, end of 2024. And I was still feeling maybe even more strongly than I did a couple of years ago that I might now want to be a mum, which is not something, as I said, that I'd really thought about before. And so that's what brought me to Kelsey, her podcast, her resources, her kids and child-free workshops, and also her one-on-one coaching. And so what Kelsey's podcast and resources have meant to me is suddenly feeling like I'm not alone. I had no idea I was going to go through this change in sentiment. I was wondering why I'm suddenly changing my mind. And I was really trying to find answers to that. I was, as I mentioned, all these circumstances. Why was I feeling differently to how I have the last 20 years? And so the podcast and all the guests really opened my eyes, first of all, to how many child-free people there are out there, how many people are grappling with this question, and how many people also dedicate their lives to supporting the child-free community. I had no idea at all. I felt like I was very naive previously. And the guests that Kelsey's had on, one thing I really love about her podcast is how she finds such unique, diverse guests. I've really enjoyed listening to the older female speakers like Maria Coffey, Helen Taylor, Marcia Davis, all of whom I love, and I've read Maria and Helen's books, to also women who also changed their mind or are still on the fence, like former fence sitter Amanda White, and hearing her story, to people who've been through the process of adoption or being an adoptee, to fertility struggles, to the concept of being an auntie, to people that create child-free community like Nicole Louie and Zoe Noble, and who also support the child-free community financially, Jay Zigmont. And I'm super excited to have an event with him in the Confidently Child-Free workshop soon. And so I've also read lots of books recommended through Kelsey herself, as well as her various guests. And I get really excited when a new podcast drops. I usually listen in the gym or when I'm out for my walk, and I sometimes end up laughing out loud in the gym when I hear something funny on the podcast, frightening the other gym members. And so I've just really appreciated all the resources. After about a year and a half of working with Kelsey, we've decided we are going to remain child-free. It's definitely been a tumultuous time. And having made my decision, I just feel so much better than I did a year or so ago. And I'm excited for the future and to also work. And having now known all the people that the child-free community that I've got to know through Kelsey and her podcast guests, as well as the resources she's provided. I just wanted to mention a few ways in which Kelsey has also helped me directly, as well as this has been reinforced through guests on her podcast as well. And one thing that really comes to mind is she made me feel like my feelings are valid. As a scientist, I think I tried to explain or rationalize my feelings, constantly finding reasons why I was feeling like this. And if I could find a reason, maybe I should dismiss that feeling. And Kelsey really helped me to see that we're all a composite of the things that have happened to us, the circumstances that cause us to have feelings on which we often base decisions. And so I shouldn't dismiss my feelings, even if I can find some potential reason for them. And that really made me feel very comforted and helped me to make my decision ultimately, and also made me feel like there's not something wrong with me, which I felt very strongly at first when I was battling with this decision. The other thing I want to say about Kelty is that I really appreciate how authentic she is. It makes me feel incredibly comfortable, and it also shows in how I think she interacts with her guests. She makes her guests feel incredibly comfortable. They open up, and you really feel like it's a genuine conversation. So again, thank you, Kelty, for making my feelings feel valid and for making me feel very comfortable to be able to talk with you and open up with you.
Now, Emma's story, as you've just heard, is a great example of the fact that this path, this decision journey is not linear for many of us. And although she was quite unshakable in her child-free choice, there came a time, as she mentioned, through different circumstances in her life changing, that had her really questioning that and asking, do I want to become a mom? And so I just want to assure you that if your journey is up and down and back and forth, and you really feel strongly one way and then another, that this is all normal. This is something that we can navigate. Of course, would be an absolute pleasure to do this with you, alongside you. Emma referred to our, of course, alongside some private coaching, our Confidently Child-Free support series, which I'd highly encourage any of you who are pretty sure that child-free is the path for you, or have maybe recently made that decision, who want to gain more confidence in that path, to check out those monthly sessions that we have, as it can offer some great community and support, and a chance for you to delve into maybe some areas of this decision that you're still feeling a bit shaky about.
Hi, Kelty. This is Paige. I'm 36 and I'm from California, and I've been married for a couple years. So at this point, I am moving towards remaining child-free, and there are several things that still make it hard to fully commit one way or the other. For me, both decisions have appeal, and I realize that may never go away, and that can be challenging. I'm always going to be curious about being a mom, and maybe I'll be wistful when I'm older. I'm realizing that a lot of tough decisions in my life in the past have required me to sort of make the other decision unappealing or wrong or bad in some way. But I realize with this decision, I just can't really do that, because I really do see how wonderful and beautiful motherhood can be. I see that in my friends and my family members that are parents, and I really admire and honor that. But honoring it, I realize, doesn't mean I need to choose it. It can also be hard when I see other women around me who are on the fence have multiple kids, and that it gives me this small stab of insecurity of wondering, oh goodness, what have I done? Have I made the decision that's right for me? But this is a usually quick response, and I end up feeling that it passes fairly quickly. So a lot of things have helped me on my journey, and I want to do a shout out to you, Kelty, because I saw your content, which led me to your podcast, and ultimately in your Kids Are Child-Free group. And I got to be a part of a group of 7 women that honestly were very instrumental in my growth process and my journey in this. I felt very lonely processing all of this beforehand, and I feel like entering that group was a really nice way to just open up and be honest about the complexity of this decision. And it was just very affirming to hear other women as well. Your podcast feels like it's very supportive, and it just gives ongoing support for me as I'm still in this journey. I think the challenge about choosing child-free sometimes is that it's a very push and pull, non-linear process. Whereas I think when you decide to have children, you have these milestones that you're pregnant, you have the baby, you watch the child grow up, and there's all these milestones. But I think with child-free, we really have to choose our own milestones, and that has been really helpful for me. And I also think that something that's been really helpful for me is just realizing that I'm human, and I am going to think about my other choices. But if I just keep taking it one day at a time, am I able to experience my values, which are things like connection and joy and beauty and simplicity and nature? If I'm really able to just experience those things day to day, then I know I am going in the right direction. So thank you so much, Kelty, and congratulations on your 100th episode. Keep it up.
So I felt like this message we had from Paige just shared a lot of wisdom with us. And go back, listen again, if you want to make sure that she imparts it all on you so it sinks in really deep. But something I appreciate that Paige shared is the fact that this is a push and pull nonlinear experience, as we talked about with Emma. And this is also something that we need to take one day at a time. You know, I appreciate that part of the exercise of getting clear on things is thinking about our lives and the kind of futures that we want for ourselves, but we are only going to get to that future one day at a time. So especially for those of you who have either made or maybe closing in on a decision, you're heavily leaning one way, realizing whether it's the motherhood path or whether it's a child-free choice, that the only way that you are going to live out this decision is in the present, in the day-to-day. And as Paige shared, you know, that's where we can experience and live out these values that we hold in our lives.
My name is Kate. I'm 36 and I'm from Ohio. Growing up, I never thought about having kids. I started getting the question when I was 22. The question being not, do you want kids, but how many kids do you want? And when do you want them? I was really taken aback by this because I hadn't envisioned that life for myself. And I started wondering what was wrong with me. The more I was asked the question, which was a lot, the more and more frustrated I became for a few reasons. Namely, my husband, who I married when I was 30, never received those kinds of questions. And I felt like I never knew how to answer in a way that set boundaries, but didn't come off as defensive. I kept questioning again, is something wrong with me? Why have I not had this thought that I want kids? So one day when I was scrolling Instagram, I stumbled upon this post about ways to respond when people ask you about your child-free lifestyle. I engaged with the post and I learned that there was a podcast all about kids or child-free. On my bike rides or my walks or during house projects, I started listening to this podcast and I started telling everyone about it. Those with kids and those without kids. It was amazing. After season 1, I decided to join one of the workshops. I really wanted to know how to approach the rest of my life in a way that made me feel confident. I logged on to that workshop and I immediately started crying, which I was not expecting. But it was the first time ever that I felt like I was in a room of people who understood exactly what I was going through. Even if our stories weren't the same, we all had similar feelings, and we didn't have to explain ourselves to one another. To say that this workshop was life-changing does not even give it the full credit. And I'm sitting here recording this and smiling because I went into that workshop thinking, I don't want kids. At that point in my life, it was like 90% I don't want kids. After listening to the podcast gave me some new ideas about what being a mom could look like. Same as what being child-free would look like. I really loved my life and I didn't want to mess anything up. After I left that workshop, though, after doing a lot of journaling and reflection and meditating, I looked at my husband and I said, I think I want a kid. Fast forward to today, I have a 10-month-old and it is amazing. My life is amazing, but I also think it would have been amazing if I would have stayed child-free. However, I was so confident in this decision, so confident now in my parenting, confident in my relationship, that I think that the workshop was a gift. It has made me such a better parent, a better spouse, a better individual. And I would not be where I am today, physically, emotionally, mentally, if I had not engaged with Kelty and all of the work. I really love this part of my story. And I tell everyone who is fence sitting or hesitant about the future, that you can find peace in a decision one way or another.
Oh my gosh, Kate, I let out an audible when you said I have my 10-month-old here. Wow, congratulations, kids or child-free decision baby we've got here. Very, very cool. I'm super happy for you. And I love the beautiful feedback you share about what the podcast has meant, what the workshop meant to you. For anyone who has not worked with me in any capacity or checked out any of our offerings, I can highly suggest checking out the Kids or Child Free workshop as your perfect next step, or perhaps first step on this journey if you have just been spinning in circles and haven't taken any concrete steps forward. I will make sure to include the link with details in the show notes of today's episode. Okay, that is all from me. I'll just be over here having a little bit of a weep, I think. I'm feeling so moved to have heard from you all today. Thank you to everyone who left messages today, to Kate, to Paige, to Emma, to Taylor, to both Kristins, to Jara, to Monica. And thank you to all of you who have been tuning in to the podcast, who've been sharing the podcast, who have been helping to spread the word. The biggest thing that you can do to help get the podcast out into more ears, into more people's eyes for that matter, which, side note, if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, be sure to do so. Details, as always, will be in the show notes. But the best thing you can do to spread the word about the podcast is to leave a rating and or a review. This is huge. If you have been listening, whether to today's episode, whether to 20 episodes, whether to all 100 episodes, and I know some of you are Club 100. I've had multiple messages and conversations with some of you who've said, I've literally listened to every episode. Yes, sometimes twice. I want you to leave a rating or review. You can do that either in the Spotify app where you can leave a star rating. Of course, 5 stars would be very, very much appreciated. Or you can do that in Apple Podcasts where, in addition to a star rating, you can also leave some kind words sharing what the podcast has meant to you or why you recommend that people who are on the fence tune in. All right, that is all from me today. Thank you for listening. It is such an honor to be creating this podcast for you each week. We are frankly just getting started. As much as this is an incredible milestone, I can't wait for our next 100 episodes. As always, if you have a guest request, if you have an idea for an episode, maybe if you want to come share your story on the podcast, send me a DM on Instagram or drop me an email. I want you to know that your requests do not fall in deaf ears. I do try and respond to as many messages as possible, but I do not always every time get back to everyone. I'm working on this. I get many, many messages, but I just want you to know that all of your suggestions are noted down. And I have a lengthy list of potential guests, of stories and sort of focuses that I want to have for these conversations. So keep the suggestions coming. All right. Again, don't forget after you listen today, today's the day to do it. Episode 100, leave a rating or review on either Spotify or Apple Podcasts within each of those respective apps. And otherwise, I wish you a beautiful day and I look forward to seeing you back here next week.